Hello, Commanders, and welcome back to the StarCraft Lorecast, the one Lorecast we have that goes over all the lore, fun facts, and stories within our favorite RTS genre and video game, StarCraft. Hope you're all doing well today, and hope you're ready for another fun episode on this podcast. Today, we're going to start our small arc going over the different races that we know of that exist within StarCraft in both the Capru sector and outside of it. Today, I figured we'd start, for this arc, I figured we'd do it like we do in the games. We'll start first off with the race that we all can find ourselves familiar with within the game, and that is the Terrans, otherwise known as humans within there. I want to start off with a quick quote. The universe never gave us a chance, but we're still alive and kicking. We got tossed to the far end of the galaxy, out smack dab between two ugly alien armies, and we're not all dead yet. Tell me that don't say something about us. We're too dumb to die. Smart species would have given up ages ago. So the Terrans or humans are known as a young species with psionic potential. The Terrans of the Caprulu sector descended from the survivors of a disastrous 3rd century colonization mission from Earth by Terran Ruth. Compared to the Protoss and Zerg, Terrans are highly factionalized and endure frequent wars amongst themselves, in addition to the more recent conflicts with their alien neighbors. Nevertheless, Terrans stand as one of the 3 dominant species of the galaxy. So, basically, we're humans. We don't know how to give up, and we'll just keep running headlong into different conflicts and pushing ourselves along further down our line of evolution, if you want to call it. But we have a no can do attitude and like to tell those who want to put us down to keep moving along and take their attitude with them. Guys like Michael Liberty once said in the books, we humans are about the most ornery cusses in the galaxy. Now, the name Terran generally refers to the humans descending from the survivors of a long sleep, and consequently to the human inhabitants of the Caprulu sector. The term may be used synonymously with human, and Terrans of the sector may extend its meaning to encompass those not descending from a long sleep. Now, like it's been stated, when we refer to Terrans, we're talking about humankind of the Caprulu sector, based out for I guess their naming convention and whatnot. But you technically have 2 different versions of humanity at this point. The Terrans of the Caprulu sector and those factions that rest within there. And then you have the United Earth Directorate over back on Earth, who refers to themselves as humans, mankind, or humanity, although sometimes referred to as Terrans from Blizzard Entertainment in years past. And according to Samir Duran, our favorite Zeldaga in hiding, Terrans are a creation of the Zelnaga's infinite cycle, which we'll touch on that in a later episode further down the line. Now, briefly touching over the physiology of humans, of Terrans, I mean. So, an average Terran you're looking at is about 1.8 meters tall, with maximum life expectancy about 150 years without any mental degradation. Though a few Terrans will live over a century old, and most Terrans over the age of 80 are still considered old. Blonde hair and blue eyes still occur naturally in Terrans, though these traits and others can be altered by gene therapy or augmentic surgery. This can lead to a certain uniformity of appearance for those who are wealthy enough to afford such treatments. Abather, our favorite Zerg geneticist, considers the Terrans to be a doomed species due to our lack of genetic diversity and proliferation of recessive traits and gene pool. Physically, Terrans are an inferior species to species such as the Zerg and Protoss. However, Terrans are known for their tenacity and ability to adapt to harsh circumstances. In addition, Terrans are only a few steps away from developing into a formidable psionic power. Terrans are a suspicious species by nature, and their inner thoughts rarely correspond to how they present themselves to others. Parts of the human brain give predisposition to ritual behavior, and Terran brains are adept at seeing patterns even if they aren't there. Advancements in Terran medical technology has removed many issues Terrans faced during their development. Cybernetic implants and advanced surgeries have allowed for quicker recovery from injuries that would be permanent or fatal hundreds of years prior. Terrans often make use of medical nanomachines in order to heal injuries both on the battlefield and in civilian infirmaries. Red Tenor has eliminated the need for corrective eyewear, though some will still wear glasses. Cosmetic surgery is widespread and common among many wealthy Terrans. However, issues such as cancer still plague humanity, with some cancers still being inoperable. Basically, every human, every Terran is physically looking like most humans of the day, 5 fingers, 5 toes, solidly built. But because Terrans of the 25th, 26th century have access to more advanced means of medical technology, they're able to get rid of a lot of the sicknesses and illnesses that plague us of our time currently. So, like I said, they're able to not wear glasses as needed. Corrective surgery is freely available for those who wish it, even though some will wear it just because it's a fancy taste of some. And way I see it, when they talk about becoming a psionic power, is that the gene of being a psionic or being able to utilize psionic abilities is becoming far more common within the Terran society than it was previously before. So I'd say let's move on to a little bit of Terran history, all our fun stuff. A lot of it's probably going to be close to the same until we get to eh, within the lore of StarCraft, I believe it's around the 21st century, later down in the years is when it goes, because StarCraft did release back in the 1900s, so late 1900s. I think was it 98? I'll have to look that up later. Actually, let's look that up now. Let's see. Yeah. Claim to be a StarCraft fan, but can't remember the actual date that StarCraft originally released. Yeah, I was right. March 31st, 1998. All right, so going into a little bit of history here. Humans evolved on Earth over millions of years, slowly advancing themselves through trial and error. Centuries after humanity finally left Earth, Forzun would speculate that in humanity's ancient past, their need to grasp and hold so tightly to everything in regards to bonds of friendship, tribalism, getting families and whatnot, helped us to survive. We developed an international power structure defined by military superiority, as well as the acquisition of capital. So, good old capitalism and many different nation states being formed, just like the United Kingdom, United States, Germany, France, Iran, Mexico. All the countries we knew of today existed back in the early time frame of the Terrans in its early history, and it probably experienced a lot of the same wars that we did in our history as well. World War I, World War II, all that fun jazz. So, decline of Western civilization. During the 20th century, human development and exchange of technology and culture spread rapidly. By the end of the 21st century, radical new technologies offered increased access to advanced computers and informational databases to even Earth's most destitute nations. So a lot of this history we're going to go over, we did kind of touch on somewhat when we were trying to set up the Capru sector and its history, speak about it. So a lot of this might be same notes and inferences, but just bear with me while we continue forth. Nuclear weapons quickly became available in abundance following the eradication of communism from the Eastern nations. Third world nations challenged the economic and military might of the world's superpowers, blasting apart the international power structure. Militant humanist factions and hardline religious groups challenged the rights of private interest corporations who profited from genetic experimentations, such as cybernetics, cloning, and gene splicing, which rose steadily into the public forum. Many of the fundamental humanist factions panicked as multitudes of people were augmented with cybernetic implants, while others manifested slight physical mutations ranging from heightened senses to advanced telepathy. Here we see the beginnings of our psionic capabilities. As technology continued to evolve and spread, world leaders sought ways to stem the growth of their nation's inhabitants. Despite this, Earth's population grew to an estimated 23 billion by the year of 2301. Pollution and a lack of natural resources and affordable fuels added to the fire. As overpopulation and genetic alterations swept across Earth, popular sentiment held that it was plummeting towards an inevitable catastrophe. Many core international and economic systems folded in upon themselves and shut down as tensions rose regarding the use and capitalization of cybernetics and genetic mutations. Active terrorisms and violence erupted between the corporate sector and the humanist factions, resulting in forced police actions across the Earth. Chaos was already rampant in many of the larger countries, but media coverage of the police actions spurred it. The precarious balance of world power ultimately exploded into international pandemonium. All this infers that because of all the increasing genetic experimentation that corporations were performing and bringing forth to the public, like cybernetics, cloning, gene splicing, and whatnot, you had a bunch of people who believed in what is it, Warhammer 40K's purity of humanity, of the human form, or the true humanity, where humanity itself should not be spliced to be looking different, no mutations within it that could either positively or negatively affect it. Humanity should be in its original form that it first started off with. That's what these people believed and what these humanist factions started utilizing, like they said, terrorism and violence to try and push their views, like normal terrorists would. And that leads us into the United Power Leagues. On November 22nd, 2299, United Power Leagues (UPL) was founded upon the basis of enlightened socialism. It accomplished that which the now defunct United Nations never could by unifying humanity. Encompassing control of 93% of the Earth's population, with only a few volatile countries in South America deciding that they didn't want to join and would go at it their own. The UPL often resorted to fascist police actions to maintain public order. With its control lasting for nearly 80 years, the UPL sought to unify the various cultures of humanity, and it went to great lengths to eradicate the last vestiges of racial separatism and designated English as the common language of Earth, banning many ancient languages in their native countries. So basically, the UPL was a socialist police fascist state, how they're kind of describing it in here, who kind of unified humanity at the time, which is kind of surprising, or at least most of humanity, and got rid of a lot of the different well, not differences, but got rid of what's the word I'm looking for? Prejudices that people held against different people and different races against them. Got rid of them. Don't agree with some of the policing actions they most likely performed to do this, but they did unite humanity in a way they couldn't have. So, Project Purification. The Unitarian Commissions officially banned religions, but the UPL held an almost zealous belief in the supposed divinity of mankind, which called for the immediate eradication of any non-vital prosthetics or mutations amongst a pure strain human gene pool. Hardline UPL proponent and scholars argued that genetic alterations, cyber technology, and use of psychoactive drugs all led to humanity's eventual degradation. Basically, divinity of mankind was a quasi-religious dogma that was zealously followed by the UPL. And like I said, it called for the eradication of anything that was considered non-vital to the human form to try and keep humanity as pure as possible. And it's, which led to something pretty bad, Project Purification, which to keep going with, but basically, most religions became defunct except for this belief that humanity had a pure form and that, should not altered in any sort of way. Like I spoke about with, Warhammer 40K's Imperium of Man and their belief in the divine human form, or at least the way they believed the Emperor of Mankind would want it. So, I guess the UPL and the Emperor of Mankind from 40K might actually be buddies at the time. You never know. So, the UPL leaders set Project Purification in motion. This project basically had UPL troops scouring every nation, rounding up dissidents, hackers, synthetics, cybernetically enhanced tech pirates, and criminals of every kind, and just gathering up, rounding them up, arresting them, whatnot. And this led to nearly 400 million people being executed. But because the world media was under the UPL's strict control, it downplayed the violence, keeping general populace of Earth unaware of what was happening right in their backyard, basically. The UPL reopened fields of research that lain dormant for decades, including the American and Russian space exploration programs, which had previously been abandoned due to drastically reduced budgets and incessant political sabotage. The coupling of cryogenic hibernation with the ability to travel through warp space ushered in a 40-year period during which the UPL founded colonies on Earth's moon and many of the other planets within the solar system. So basically, the UPL decided after they started this Project Purification type thing, let's get humanity out there and spread due to all the resource shortages that were going on and the overpopulation and overcrowding on Earth. So they decided, let's put people on a ship, send them out to other planets within the solar system, maybe even further beyond. But during this period, a Terran Ruth became obsessed with founding colonies on the outlying worlds, convinced that discovery of new minerals and alternate fuel sources would make him one of the most influential men on Earth. Utilizing his political connections and his personal fortune, he was able to secure 56,000 prisoners that were slated for mass execution under the Edict of Project Purification. These prisoners were transported to his private laboratories, where he had his science crews prep them for long-term cryogenic hibernation. He cataloged their various mutations, cybernetic enhancements, then input all of the data into Atlas, which was an AI that would watch over these people, which processed this information and predicted which of the prisoners should be able to survive the rigorous conditions of the journey. The 40,000 who were deemed viable out of the 56,000 he took, so the loss of 16,000 people, were loaded onto four supercarriers with enough supplies, rations, and hardware to aid them once they arrived at their destination. And the navigation computer was then programmed with the coordinates of Gantris 6. And as these ships were intended for colonization, they included technology such as frozen fertilized eggs and embryos, cloning technology, food processors, probably water purification devices, etc., to help with the creation of this new colony that he wanted. So, next session we'll be talking about the long sleep, but let me read a little quote here for you. Long ago, our ancestors were cast out from their homeworld, deemed unfit for civilized society. They packed our forebears into spaceships and gave them the dubious honors of colonizing a barren swath of the galaxy. They probably thought we'd be wiped out by the dangers of the universe, but they underestimated us. We're survivors, we're winners, we're Terran, and we intend to bend the universe to our will. Source an anonymous Terran. So, around 2231, Atlas was installed into Naglfar, Argo, Serengo, and Reagan, which were programmed to follow Naglfar. God, I suck with these names, man. I'm so sorry, guys, if I offend anybody with this. English is my first language. I don't think, what is this? Probably Nordic or Swedish? I'm sorry. As it was launched towards Gantry 6, it was scheduled as a one-year trip, and Atlas continued to monitor the prisoners in stasis over the course of the journey. It evaluated the numerous mutations and enhancements found within their gene pool, and soon became aware of a powerful mutagenic strain that existed in the DNA of less than 1% of the prisoners and seemed to augment the latent psionic potential within the human brain. Atlas calculated that many of the prisoners might benefit from this psionic mutation within only a few generations should they survive in their new environment. These findings were recorded and relayed straight into Ruth's logs. But due to being cryogenically frozen and whatnot, the prisoners were unaware that the UPL was recording their every move, content to observe them without directly interfering in their affairs. At some point during the journey, the navigation systems linked the Atlas ship down, erasing the coordinates of Gantry 6 and Earth, and the supercarriers blindly drew the warp for another 28 years until the warp drive engines reached critical meltdown. And as stated in our section of the Capulus sector history, this would cause them to merge within the Capulus sector, and for the Reagan and Serengo, the crash land on the Moja, where the Serengo basically lost everybody on board due to systems failures and crashing headfirst into the planet, flattening everything. While the Reagan was able to land safely, the Argo landed on Moria, while the, god damn it, Naglfar landed on Tarsonis. And the Naglfar's passengers were able to access Atlas directly, and they confirmed that they would never see Earth again due to everything that had happened, including Atlas suffering many critical failures. It was vital to giving them a head start. Even though Atlas had suffered many critical failures, it was vital to giving them a head start when it came to establishing themselves. And on to the new world. Thinking they were the only survivors of long sleep, the inhabitants of each planet worked to survive in what they termed the new world, making do with whatever meager resources they could find in an attempt to find refuge in their new surroundings. The surviving exiles stripped their wrecked ships of essential minerals. Basically, what most people would do: take the ship, turn it into a home, or tear it apart and utilize its materials to create that home. So the colonial populations grew quickly during the first 3 generations, and for the first 5 or 6, social pressure was heavy to try and have as many children as possible. But they also utilized the technology that was placed within the 4 different carriers, or I guess 3 now, since these basically crashed and burned. But this included the stores of fertilized eggs and frozen embryos, along with cloning technology. But all this began to break down after 50 years, since the equipment to maintain it was unavailable to them. And the Tarsonians expanded quickly to establish cities and industry over much of the planet's surface. As the Umogens spread across the planet, they quickly adopted a method of fair and democratic governance that later became known as the Umogen Ruling Council, had a philosophy of leaving nothing to waste. In a relatively short amount of time, all 3 colonies spread to other worlds and developed their own prosperous, self-supporting economies. So basically, after the 4 ships went into 3 different systems, the people of these ships would go out, build a home on these new planets that they each went on, and they would further colonize the system they were in, just like the UPL did for the system of Sol, where Earth resided in. In a relatively short amount of time, all three colonies spread to other worlds and developed their own prosperous, self-supporting economies. I just said that. After 60 years, the Tarsonians developed second-generation subwarp engines, allowing their ships to make contact with Moria and Umoja. Uranus was the most technologically advanced and prosperous out of the three different colonies. Once reunited, the three colonies benefited from mutual trade and commerce treaties. Mining and manufacturing boom took Moria by storm. Dozens of small family-run guilds scrambled to claim as much land as possible, and soon hundreds of refineries, factories, and mining facilities sprouted up on Moira, Fido, and Brutus. Over time, the larger guilds used a variety of shady tactics to eliminate competition until the Morian Mining Coalition and the Kalanis Shipping Guild came to dominate Moria's economic activities, gradually gaining political influence over Moria and its associated operations on nearby planets, moons, and asteroids. So, yeah, basically the big companies took over Moira and soon became its governance. During all this, Tarsonis would repeatedly push Moira and Umoja to join in a conglomerated government, but the two colonies steadfastly refused as they were faced with the likely preeminence of Tarsonis in arrangement. Basically, Tarsonis wanted to create a united front of humanity, but Moira and Umoja knew that if they joined, Tarsonis would basically be the head honcho of this, and they decided, you know what, I don't think I want to do that. So, I mean, with what it became kind of understandable because the old families responded to this by expanding their military and colonization far more aggressively than before. And because of its poor geological makeup, Shiloh was ignored by settlers who wanted to focus on planets that could sustain industry and spacefaring commerce. Now, this will come back to bite people in the butt as soon as we'll learn. Stuff is going wild. Sorry, guys. The Terran Confederacy. We'll talk about them later when we actually talk about, the different factions of the Terrans. All right. So, as we stated in the beginning of the episode, Terrans are known to have wars among themselves and fight each other for, different things, just like normal humans would over land, country, policies, women, romance, all that fun jazz. So, the Guild Wars, which we'll dive into deeper on a different episode, was basically a war between the Terran Dominion and what would become the Kelmorian Combine. In the sector over, uh, rights to plants and whatnot. So, securing the rights to exploit the mineral fields on Redstone 3 was the flashpoint for conflicts between different mining guilds. The Morian Mining Coalition and Kalana Shipping Guild began to fear that the Confederacy might attempt to move in and use its military strength to regulate their lucrative operations. Two organizations merged to form the Kelmorian Combine, which pledged military aid to any mining guild that was threatened by Confederate policy. From that day forward, the thin line that had once existed on Moria between commercial entities and the independent government vanished. So basically, a lot of the mining guilds and companies within Moira were worried that the Terran Confederation would try and enforce its standards and regulations upon them, and decided they didn't want that. So instead, they created their own government and took over the previous government of Moira. And one planet would cause this to go off. And that's all our favorite planet, Char, that hellish world. So Char was settled to exploit its fantastically rich reserve of heavy metals to fuel the rapidly growing Confederate economy. Although Char earned a place among the 13 core worlds of the Confederacy, it became a source of friction between the Confederacy and independent mining guilds operating out of Moira. In 2485, these disputes escalated into open conflict, and the guild wars were fought on Char, Zonyan, Artesia Prime, and Taraxis II. Umojan volunteers fought for the KMC as unofficial combatants, most of whom reveled in the chance to battle the Confederacy, and the KMC would hire a mercenary outfit to protect fallible resources. Now, the Confederacy relied heavily on Shiloh's agricultural output during these wars, and there were hard times when the government was slow in remunerating the overtaxed farmers. These conditions were eased somewhat by the Farm Aid program, but they created lingering resentment among the settlers. And the Guild Wars would come to an end in 2489 with a skewed peace agreement whereby the KMC retained its autonomy, but nearly all of its affiliated mining guilds were annexed by the Confederacy. Seeing this as utterly abusive, the Umojan ruling council held an emergency sitting and formed the Umojan Protectorate, which would only oppose a number which would openly oppose a number of Confederate encroachments on its territories. In the final analysis, the wars assured the Confederacy's supremacy within this sector. And so the Confederacy would continue to grow on and all this fun stuff. And the old families would continue ruling through the Confederacy, causing issues between each other until the rebellion of Cornwall, where Senator Angus Manx would become a voice of a secessionist movement. And this movement wanted to break away from the Confederacy for different reasons at the time. And the Confederacy didn't like that. And so they sent the Sarah Kerrigan and two other codes to Cornwall and basically assassinating Senator Angus Manx, his wife, and their young daughter, and taking his head with them. This would leave Arcturus Manx as the sole left family member, and he would return to Cornwall from the fringe worlds, would rally the various militant groups that had followed his father against the Confederacy, and would strike at multiple different Confederate bases and installations, costing the old families billions of credits in men, machine, and equipment. He would then form an alliance with the emergent protectorate. When these rumors reached the Confederacy, they didn't take that too kindly. And so they launched a salvo of 8,000, that's right, 1,000, 1 and 3 zeros of their Apocalypse-class nuclear missiles at Cornwall and basically obliterate the surface of it. Manx wasn't on the surface at this time because he was in the orbit on the spy deck and would then rename the group he was with as the Sons of Cornwall. Because the nuclear bombardment of Cornwall, it basically caused people to join his group more. And Manx would lead this for a rebellion for quite a long time. I think we'll continue that in a further episode when we go try to dive deeper into the different conflicts of the Corpulu sector. So, first contact. Now, what do we mean by first contact? Well, first contact with different alien races that nobody had ever run into before. So, here's the thing about the Confederacy. They're a bunch of a-holes that, decide they know the best of what to do and that nobody else should rule except for them, which we'd see later on down the line in different factions as well. But the Confederacy knew about the imminent arrival of Zerg by the year 2498. It would experiment with captured specimens in the Jacobs installation, which was a Terran Confederacy research facility over on the good old planet of Marsara. And as normal, they decided, hey, we could probably use these guys to wipe out our rivals and for war and whatnot. But that didn't happen because in the end, in the year 2499, Alsara, Montes, and Dilar 4 were infested by the Zerg. And on December 8th, Chowsara was incinerated from orbit by the Corpulu Expeditionary Force. A fleet of Protoss ships that came over to the Corpulu sector once they got word that, oh, hey guys, look, there's a bunch of Zerg over there. Let's go kill them. Yeah, not a good time for the Terrans with their first contact, considering, one was a aggressive alien species intent on eating up everything to evolve, and the other were a bunch of psychic aliens that decided with their first move to destroy one of their worlds. Yeah, so not a good first impression, I'll tell you what. So as the Protoss fleet made its way towards Marsara, the Confederacy launched a counterattack commanded by General Edmund Duke and sent a new magistrate to safeguard the colonists and keep their state of panic from escalating any further. But this event caused widespread panic throughout the UPL, who were always observing the Corpulu sector, because they could, but not intervening at all. And in the end, this would bring the descendant countries, the South American ones, into the fold and allowing the UPL to be renamed to the United Earth Directorate. Now, the UED took a more proactive militaristic stance in regards to alien affairs and bent all of its considerable resources towards studying the aliens and their maneuverings. And they spent the next several months monitoring the Protoss and Zerg, gathering data on their strengths and weaknesses. Now, the Umajin Protectorate sought a truce with the Protoss, while the KMC went to great lengths to stay outside of the conflict. Confederate traffic would increase substantially within the Sara system in the 4 days after the incineration of Chowsara. They would quarantine Marsara as well. 48 hours before they were to proceed with the lockdown, Duke sent the core colonists to the wasteland, escorted by Marshal Jim Raynor, our favorite Terran, at least my favorite anyways. And the Confederacy deliberately sacrificed Marsara in order to test the psi emitter, a device that would draw Zerg to it with psychic emanations and whatnot. So Headquarters was alerted when Backwater Station came under attack by the Zerg, but the station was saved by Raynor and local militia forces sent in by the magistrate. Duke would subsequently arrest them on the pretext of violating standard colonial law by destroying Confederate property. Soon, 16 outland stations reported sightings of the Zerg, but the Confederates continued to avoid action against them. 3 stations fell before the Sons of Coral intervened and evacuated thousands of colonists. 3 hours later, Marsar was completely overrun by the Zerg. The Sons of Coral liberated Raynor and his men from the Confederate prison ship, and Manx became aware of the Jacobs installation via warfare fields intel. Chaos of the Confederate evacuation allowed Raynor to raid the facility, access the Confederate network, and steal secret information on data disks. The Antiguan revolt was due with the Confederacy's grip on the French World's weekend. Antigua Prime was ready to begin open revolt against them. Aware of this, the Confederates stationed a large detachment of Alpha Squadron troops there. Manx sent Kerrigan and Raynor to free the colony and show their good intent to the Antiguan people, with Kerrigan infiltrating the command center and killing the Confederate officer, stirring up a full-scale revolt that caused the Confederacy to go into a state of panic. In NORAD 2, a ship was attacked by the Zerg, crash landing on Antigua Prime, which that ship was the flagship of General Edmund Duke. Hooray! Manx would send Raynor to save Duke, whom he convinced to join forces with the Sons of Coral. And after that, Confederacy found them, sent out a force to wipe them out. Kerrigan, ordered by Manx, planted the Cymer in the Confederate base, and the Zerg would annihilate them, allowing the Sons of Coral to make their escape. And then you had the fall of Tarsanis, which is basically Duke would plant psi emitters there, and Manx would send Kerrigan to stop Protoss forces from engaging Zerg hive clusters. And after that would happen, Kerrigan would call for immediate evac, and Arcturus betrayed her like the a-hole he is, allowing Tarsanis to be basically destroyed by the Zerg, and Kerrigan abandoned to them. Raynor would desert Manx after this, and Duke would successfully activate an ion cannon, but destroyed by the now named Raynor's Raiders, who then escaped from Tarsanis, seized a Hyperion and a small fleet of ships in the battle at the Deliner shipyards, and would become known as revolutionists. All this would lead to the eventual rise of the Terran Dominion, because after Tarsanis was attacked by the Zerg, well, the Confederacy would end up collapsing. And so Arcturus took over. Said, hey, I'm taking command of the Terran Confederacy. It's now the Terran Dominion. I am now the Emperor. I will now initially the Imogen Protectorate would rally to the Dominion side. Over time, however, its heavy-handed tactics resembling those of the Confederacy would cause the Protectorate to distance itself from the Dominion as it became increasingly oppressive. Even though many of its founders from the Sons of Coral spent a hard time at New Folsom Prison, the Dominion would still utilize it as a practice. The Manx would reinforce the armies of the Dominion by forcefully conscripting the remaining warriors of the Confederacy, and would set out to fortify the various worlds under his care. A permanent defense force was stationed on Agria. Warfield would become a general and was seen as one of Manx's most trusted advisors, and Manx would trust him with the most crucial tax stratagems and missions to be utilized. Basically, that's everything that would happen in the Terran campaign of StarCraft 1. And then in StarCraft 2, the only thing is the Terrans were, Raynor and Manx would be sought out, would be, telepathically contacted by Kerrigan to Char, but they wouldn't be able to kill her. So, and she would then unlock her psionic powers because of the Confederacy programming that would reduce their powers. Now, in episode 3 of StarCraft, the Protoss campaign, you'd have Raynor would help out the Tassadar. He would help them out, protect the Protoss, and would fight on Ire and help Tassadar's followers to basically evacuate Ire and weaken Overmind before they could destroy it. Then we go into the Brood War, which is when the UED would show up, try to take over the system, either eliminate or control the Protoss and the Zerg, take over the rest of the Terrans or humans within the Caprilu sector, just expand its control. This would end up ultimately failing, as a lot of forces would go up against them. So my computer doesn't want to work for me today. I'm sorry, guys. So basically, like I said, the UED would send a force over there, try to take it over, fail because the Terrans, Protoss, and Zerg would come together. And granted, Kerrigan would utilize Raynor and Saratol to kill the other Cerebrits so she could take control of the Zerg. But that's the only thing that happened with that. And while the UED fleet would try to run, Kerrigan eliminated it, making sure no word got back to Earth and the rest of humanity over there, and leaving the Terrans to their own corner. And because of this, you'd have some UED guys, which would become a mercenary company, probably other UED soldiers who would be prisoners and then probably, forcefully conscripted or becoming other mercenaries as well. And during this, that's when Zeratul and Raynor would become the best of friends. So then you'd have the Reconstruction period. So although Warfield would retire in the year of 2501, Dominion rose again to become the most powerful force among the Terran factions. It took over almost all of the original Confederate worlds, including Braxis. And the UNN reported that the retaking of Braxis was a valiant military action, despite the fact that there was no opposition. Over the next 4 years, the Dominion extended its influence throughout the sector, with most of the Dominion populace accepting Manx's role, believing him to be the only leader capable of protecting them from the aliens. Manx asserted that humanity's only chance to survive the dark days ahead was to be united under his leadership, whether by choice or by force. Vast fortunes were lavished on the cleanup and rebuilding of Core Hall, although portions of the irradiated desert were left untouched in honor of those who died. Planetary defenses were massively increased, and Manx turned Core Hall into the most heavily fortified planet in the Kapulu sector. Location was the Skygear Station, where the Dominion had help from Dr. Emil Neroon and combining Protoss and Zerg DNA to create hybrid creatures in the future, but we'll touch on that later. Raynor would end up leading a resistance movement against Manx, who would utilize the media and propaganda to marginalize his efforts, and this resistance movement would be called Rainer's Raiders. So Rainer's Raiders instigated open rebellions across 6 separate worlds and stole vast amounts of Dominion weapons and hardware. It would spend trillions on keeping them constantly hunted and harried, denying them any chance to gain a respite and build their strength. Hilo came under noticeably increased surveillance by Dominion military forces, which only heightened the agitation of the colonists. It's unclear whether the Dominion was trying to flesh out potential seditionists like Raynor or presenting a show of force to encourage any imitators. The Umujin Protectorate remained ideologically opposed to Dominion and was widely considered a safe haven for individuals seeking refuge from persecution of mixed forces. Cognizant of the fact, Dominion took measures to undermine the sovereignty of Umoja and its affiliated worlds by imposing trade embargoes and making assassination attempts against dissidents pursuing asylum. The Umojan ruling council was fully aware of Dominion's unparalleled military might and embarked on a more covert route to uphold its independence. Over a few years, the Protectorate would funnel resources into advanced technological research, establishing a far-reaching network of anti-Dominion separatists and stationing elite espionage agents throughout the sector to keep tabs on the Dominion. The ruling council's members would debate whether or not Dominion would ever make more forceful moves against Umoja or its allies. Regardless, they unanimously agreed to continue their subversive activities and were prepared to take any action necessary to preserve the freedom of Umoja and other protectorate worlds. Umoja would caution about the Dominion influence, and intrusion was most pronounced in its scientific research and development. So basically, Umoja would become its own corner of research in technology development and would rely more on other states and separatists and covert ops to go against Dominion rule, whereas Dominion focused on military research and improving its military buildup and whatnot. And that's why it's always believed that Umoja has far better technology than the rest of Terran factions because it did put a lot of resources into that technology research. Now, the KMC, Kilmorian Combine, our favorite corporate faction, which didn't really have much going on, would retain control over Moira and was still considered a productive trading, manufacturing, and mining hub, and would focus on building up its commercial empire. The rise of the Dominion would cause concern among the KMC leaders over the safety of their far-flung mining operations. Nonetheless, they were intent on claiming more worlds for plunder. Their prospectors found that minerals on Marsara had acquired unique properties due to Protoss purification. Shortly thereafter, the KMC staked a claim to the mining and salvage rights over the Sara system. In 2502, independent and indentured contractors began ship mining both Marsara and Charsara of their resources. And intent on stealing Agria's high-tech scientific equipment, a heavily armed group of pirates stormed the colony in 2503. Dominion Marines engaged pirates to protect these valuable assets, carelessly slaughtering colonists who were caught in the crossfire. So, basically, during these years, a lot of stuff would happen. Minor conflicts, piratical raids, other incursions of Zerg and Protoss. The Terrans would fight and, do this. You'd have Raynor, who was resisting Dominion rule. You'd have Crown Prince Valerian Manx, the son of Arcturus Manx, would end up utilizing the Dominion's vast resources to search for Xelnog artifacts, continue research into the research of ancient alien artifacts and temples and, Oh, ruins. I don't know why I was blanking on that. But yeah, he would research in that. But he would also set up the Mobius Foundation to search as he sought to construct the Keystone to make Kerrigan human again. And so all this would keep happening and would lead up into StarCraft 2, where the Terrans, which followed the story of Rhaenys Raiders, we could go on later at a different time, but basically, Rainer would continue his resistance against Manx, helped out by his friend Tychus, would pick up Taj and the Spectres, or at least that's what I believe, anyways, is the canon part of that. But yeah, and they would go to Char, Zerg, Kerrigan, and continue on from there. If you guys want a further breakdown of the campaigns of StarCraft 2, I don't mind doing that. My internet does not want to work today, guys. But in the end, Terran history would continue on, where then you'd have the Heart of the Swarm campaign, where Kerrigan would become reinfested, lead the Zerg again, and would end up killing Manx with Raynor. After that, you would have the Legacy of the Void, which would bring forth the End War. So the first two stories of campaigns of StarCraft 2 are known as the Second Great War. Then you have the End War, which is the Legacy of the Void campaign, where the Protoss would help the Terrans at the Battle of Korhal over there, help them defend Korhal, take back the Keystone, destroy the Sky Shield while they're trying to crash it, and the Mobius Corps would fight and would help fight back against the Mobius Corps. Then you'd have the final battle of Into the Void, where the Terrans, led by Raynor and Horner, would help Artanis and Kerrigan defeat Narud, protect Kerrigan as she was transformed into Xal'Naga, and slaughter Aemon in the end. And then, as we all know, good old Jimmy Kerrigan would disappear. So aftermath and recovery, a lot of stuff would happen into this. There would still be multiple different incursions by Zerg, fights with the Tal'Darim faction of the Protoss and other Protoss factions as small skirmishes because commanders could not keep their blades in their sheaths and would want to keep fighting. And one of these big things would be the Defenders of Man, who would try to utilize psi emitters to bring Zerg to attack other planets to discredit Valyrian Manx, the Terran Dominion, because the Defenders of Man were a bunch of Arcturus Manx hardliners. So, yeah. We know in 2511, you would have, god damn it, everything just fucking crashed on me. Holy shit. Hold on, guys. Give me a minute while I try to get everything back up and running again. Just beautiful. I try and start this and my computer just wants to take his shit on me. I might need to look into getting a new computer, getting where was I at? Where was I at? Right. I think I was at, yes, the One Day War, which would occur in 2511 between Terran Dominion, Protoss, and Zerg again. This all happened because Overking Zagara would approach Korhal, ask Valerian for help at the planet of Jizd against Hierarch Artanis. They would because Zagara sought to undo damage from the war that had occurred, and that the plant life on the planet contains Xal'Naga patterns in essence. However, the survey team came under attack by a strain of Zerg, and commanding a number of core strains, luring them into a focal point of psionic energy. There they found creatures similar to the ones attacking them and destroyed the nest. However, Zagara would reveal that these creatures, the Adastra, were what regenerated the world and that there was a finite number. She also denied the existence of any other creatures the survey team had seen. But this would cause tensions to heat up as it was revealed that Abathur created new creatures because he wanted to keep conflict going so he could, take gene instances and cause evolution within the swarm again, like they originally did. The survey team would save the last nest. Zagara would beat up Abathur. The team's ghost, Anya Caulfield, killing the remaining Chitta, which were what Abathur had created. And that would be the end of that conflict. And you'd still have tensions between Terran powers, Tal'Darim, the Imogen creating anti-Protoss weaponry, Territor 9 suffering innovation by the Cerberus program, they're enslaved Zerg, but repelled by the arrival of the Ehan Re sector Protoss. So you'd still have tensions going along after all of that would occur. So that's just the history of Terrans. Let's go over into their culture. Just talk a bit about that. We'll start this off with a nice little quote. "We can become better than what we are, sir. I know this. I've tasted it." By Devon Stark. So Terrans are an ingenious and industrious species. It can be said that for Terrans, honor is less important than getting results. However, Terrans have also demonstrated a great need to hold on to those around them, an ability to let go of those close to them. Farzan speculated that this behavior was a holdover from humanity's ancient past. Before the founding of the United Power Leagues, Terrans possessed a diversity of beliefs that would subsequently be repressed. This remained true with the Terran Confederacy, which had limited tolerance for other faiths. However, a few planets in the Capri sector, notably the Fringe Worlds, have resurrected old Earth religions, Christianity among them, in addition to creating cults, to include the Church of the Sainted Pelagius being an example. For more agnostic societies, some Terrans still believe in the existence of a monotheistic deity, though others are distinctly skeptical. For Terrans, it's considered polite to nod before entering, and this behavior is considered strange to Protoss, as unlike Terrans, they easily sense each other and do not need to announce their presence in such a manner. Entry in rock music genre still exists within the Caprilu sector, and despite fragments of Earth's history being absent from Terran records, some ancient mythologies are still remembered. These include tales of various afterlives and their dark alternatives, including Hell, Tartarus, and Sheol. Warrior women are remembered from at least one mythology, and elements of Greek mythology have also been retained. And at least in the Caprilu sector, Terran cuisine is highly varied. Many Terrans pursue consumerism, with both Protoss and Zerg individuals noting that Terrans are a species driven by greed, capitalism. It works well even in the future, I guess. So, one belief, or rather hope, that has remained more or less constant for humanity is a fascination with the existence of other sapient life. A hope that remained unfulfilled until contact was made with the Protestant Zergs, and the leaders of the United Power League were of a different mindset than their Cthulhu predectors, demonstrating a purely militaristic and xenophobic approach to the discovery of alien species. So whereas the Terrans believed, hey, maybe there's life out there that we can work with, the humans, but Earth believed, nah, death to the alien. Humanity reigns supreme. Good lord. If one takes an outsider's view on humanity, then humanity possesses a wide, puzzling spectrum of morality. When compared to the elder species, Terrans are far more obsessed with the notion of private thought and personal freedom, and are not meant for the unity of the call-up brings. Protoss. Having experienced, however, Terran ghosts theorized humans could have become a better people when they were able to share the psionic link. Terrans have displayed disregard for the natural world and anathema to the Protoss. So, Terrans are basically pretty similar to modern-day humans, like I said, within their culture and whatnot. Have many different religions, many different theologies, some agnostics, some not, believe in consumerism, greed, all that fun jazz. But we're still highly, I won't say tribal, but somewhat family-oriented, and holding on to friends that we know to help us through hard times. Now, you have a lot of different factions within humanity that I'll probably go over each of them in their own separate video. Things like the Kelmorian Combine, Terran Dominion, the Protectorate, Terran Confederacy, the UED, the different mercenary outfits and whatnot. I'll go over all of those in each of their separate video. Probably the mercenaries, I'll probably go in one separate video itself, because there's too many to count. So the technology that the Terrans use. On a galactic scale, Terrans are perhaps a middle-of-the-road species and something of a paradox technologically. Of the galaxy's sapient species, Terrans are significantly inferior to the life of the Protoss, yet seemingly more advanced than other sapiens. From an outsider's point of view, humanity has paradoxically improved its technology despite being in an apparently constant state of conflict. But within an insider's point of view, such development has been possible not in spite of conflict, but because of it. Because in history we see that unfortunately during wartime, is when our technology advanced the most, unfortunately. So, yeah. Terrans have a vast assortment of weapons and vehicles at their disposal, and they're always trying to create more powerful weapons. Fair gauges, terrain mappers, targeting systems are standard for Terran fightercraft, with their armies possessing both adaptability and resilience. Terran technology includes FTL transmission and sensor technology, but we've yet to crack quantum computing at that time. Weird. Do you think we would? The maintenance of supply lines is vital within the Terran warfare doctrine, and Terrans have greatly developed their engineering abilities at the brute war. So, basically, just like a lot of other science fiction stories, humanity isn't as advanced as other species within the galaxy. Mainly, if we think about it, the Protoss are advanced psionically, have a lot of greater technology, whereas the Zerg are advanced biologically and have never needed to utilize technology to get things done that they need to get done. But Terrans are still somewhat advanced and are still increasing their technology level, mainly due to meeting the Protoss and Zerg and adapting some of the stuff they've learned from them. But, because in the end, Terrans still have faster than light drives. They still have FTL transmissions. They still have powerful weaponry and armor. So, but that would end. That's kind of what we mostly know about Terrans. They're just like everyday humans, you and I, struggling to adapt and survive in a sector of the galaxy that is pretty hostile to them. So they still have that core human spirit of keep on. No, don't stop. Keep doing what we need to keep doing and push on to make a better place for our people, which is, yeah, that's really, really inspiring if you really want to think about it. Yes, they've had bumps in the road. They've had terrible leaders, horrifying ones, but they're still around. They're still kicking, even after everything that's been thrown to them through civil wars, wars between different governments within the system, two wars between the Zerg and Protoss, and basically an end war that could have cost the life of everybody. But there are some notes I'd like to speak about that come from Blizzard developers when they first designed them. Some cool facts about their development. In '98, Sandy Peterson noted the paradox of StarCraft being popular in South Korea despite the lack of any Terran characters of Korean origin and IP at the time. No consensus exists in regards to Terran weaponry, at least in StarCraft 2. Generally, Terran weapons are ballistic, with directed energy weapons being reserved for high technology units. But in the period of between 2013 and 2018, our article was the least visited playable race on the page, with the exception only being Sarah Kerrigan as one of the most looked up Terran parts. Within the development of the Terran race, the idea of humans being in StarCraft was present from the outset and were the first race developed for the game. However, the developers didn't want to do galactic good guy trope, like almost everything else does. Mass Effect, Halo, Star Wars. I could see an argument for Warhammer 40K, but they're not really, the Imperium isn't really good. Starship Troopers, where they're supposed to be the good guys. A lot of sci-fi guys who fall into that trope. So instead they went with the surly space cowboys that were prisoners, otherwise referred to as being akin to the outlaws of the Old West, except in power armor and rocking gauze rifles. Though, from my personal experience, I've heard them called, oh yeah, they're the criminals that were sent to space Australia, just like how the United Kingdom sent a bunch of criminals down to Australia to colonize it. I can see the similarities, to be honest with you. The Terran race kit began with general guidelines to help differentiate from other popular sci-fi franchises at the time. For instance, they were designed to be antithetical to the generally peaceful races of the Star Trek universe. Because even though Star Trek's supposed to be exploration and discovery, they still have wars. Dominion War. But it was intended for Terrans to be different from their human counterparts in the Diablo and Warcraft universes. And they ended up being, in the words of Samwise Dieter, would be cannon fodder stuck in the middle of nowhere and fighting against each other. During early development of the game, carried on to various extents, Terrans were rednecks in space. Idea behind this came from Blizzard's cinematic team while the game's story was still being developed. The idea of the Terrans was to bring a Wild West atmosphere to space, and they were likewise described as space cowboys by Glenn Stafford. Chris Metzen would play a key role in the space cowboy element, as during development, he did a picture of a cowboy. Developers thus ran with the idea of StarCraft as space western, whereas instead of riding horses, Terrans would be riding their good old vulture bikes. Now, while the Zerg and Protoss are more esoteric, the Terrans represent the familiar to the type of player because, they're basically humans. Why else would they be familiar to us? So, in the original conception of StarCraft, which was originally supposed to take place within the 20th century, the Terrans had a different backstory. Over more than 6 centuries, they had dominated stars, but by the time the game took place, they controlled just a fragment of their once great civilization, were disunited. From a development standpoint, the Terran aesthetic, instead of being clunky, well-together, rusty, bulky, hard-edged, etc. The root of this aesthetic lies firmly in the modern military-industrial look. Per the race kit guidelines, the developers didn't want the Terrans to be super clean or fancy, nor did they want the Terrans to use hard sci-fi tech. Along with the Zerg and Protoss, the Terran aesthetic was decided early on in the development of StarCraft that their structures would be square and clunky, and that the Terrans themselves would be rough and dirty. Shape language theory was used for the design of Terran structures, along with the Protoss and the Zerg. In the case of the Terrans, their structures are based around squares and rectangles, with key examples being the barracks and the factory, two of the most basic structures you place down for a Terran army. For StarCraft 2, several of the new Terran units were given sleeker, more advanced designs when compared to their forebears. This was done to showcase the technological progress Terrans had made between StarCraft and its sequel. So, a couple things based on the design and whatnot. There are inspirations that the Terrans would come from. Bob Fitch has cited the United States Colonial Marine Corps from aliens as the primary source of inspiration for the Terrans, and the space cowboy theme was later added to, altered, and were influenced by Firefly for StarCraft 2. Terrans are direct inspiration for Kenya Affection and Stormgate because Stormgate was developed by ex-Blizzard employees. Forget where I had read a rumor, not a rumor, I had read somewhere around that though the rumor has gone around that Warhammer 40K, the Games Workshop had wanted Blizzard to do a Warhammer 40K RTS game with Blizzard. I believe one of the developers said that they were never asked that. They didn't even realize Warhammer 40K, like, Tyranids existed until after they were done with the game. Is that rumor true? Don't particularly believe so. I mean, I could be wrong. You never know. But that is what I've read somewhere. I'd have to find it again for you guys. But yeah, so that's our basic understanding of Terrans, what they're like, their culture, their history, not philosophy, physiology, a bit about their technology, whatnot. We can go deeper and we'll be going deeper into the factions later on down the line. I have a whole arc plan for all of that. So just stand by for that, where we'll dive deeper into the Confederacy, the Dominion, the Image Protectorate, Gilmorian Combine, the UED, Mobius Foundation, and the different mercenary and pirate factions within the that exist within the Terran race as a whole. But I hope you enjoyed our time here. I hope you enjoyed learning a bit about the Terrans of StarCraft and diving a little bit deeper into one of our favorite RTS franchises. Love to have you guys here. Would love to see you back, and hope you commanders have victories with